Hello, and welcome to the Art of Lost and Found podcast. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Emily Lane on today's episode. Emily Lane is a futurist and founder of the Evolutionary Intelligence Academy. With a professional background in business, a near-death experience catapulted her into a 20-year quest for deeper meaning and purpose. Her journey led her to distill, explore, and apply some of the most leading edge inner technologies of our world today. Emily works multidimensionally, and she shares practical tools of evolutionary intelligence so that leaders and pioneers can solidify their clarity, purpose, and, of course, their creative power. Emily consults on the birth and direction of evolutionary projects, and she shared the stage with luminaries from academia, the World Bank, the United Nations, and World Economic Forum, among many others. She's spoken in front of royalty, in front of governments, Silicon Valley executives, and thousands of pioneers around the world. She's been published by Mindful Leader and taught at the Omega Institute in New York. She was a founding partner of the groundbreaking Conscious Business World Summit and former host of the world's largest mindfulness in business conference, Wisdom 2.0 in San Francisco. All of her work is infused with uplifting activation energy and, of course, her Irish sense of humor. This comes through quite a bit in the podcast. Our conversation focused on the intersection of creativity, entrepreneurship, leadership, and personal development. As woo-woo or esoteric as some of these ideas can feel at first, Emily is the master at making these concepts accessible, understandable, and actionable. In this conversation, she guides us through a step-by-step process to help us identify and connect with our inner guidance. This is part of what she calls connecting to evolutionary intelligence. We do this so that we can access that power to make practical decisions in our life and our work. Stay tuned to the end where Emily introduces her 6-week program for evolutionary leaders, which I very much look forward to participating in myself starting January 2024. All right, now let's dive into this super rich conversation. Welcome to the Art of Lost and Found podcast, Emily. I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
No, it's so nice to be here, Brooke. And thanks a million for inviting me and to connect with your people.
Yeah, such a pleasure. I invited you onto the show because you came highly recommended by somebody who I believe has excellent judgment and a big, beautiful heart. And when you and I connected just to kind of feel it out, see if we vibe, see if it made sense to bring you into this experience, it was one of the most powerful encounters I've had. Like it just on all of the levels, I felt so expanded and activated that this is the second time we are filming this podcast, despite the fact that you have COVID right now. You're such a trooper. But it was a no-brainer that we had to do this because your story is fascinating and epic, but the wisdom that you've been able to pull from the story and how you've woven that into the work that you're doing now is really phenomenal and deserves expression to as many people as possible. So I'm honored to have you on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much. You're so sweet. Thank you so much, Brooke.
So as we get started, can you share a little bit of your context of who are you? What's the work that you're doing in the world now? Just give us a little bit of context before we dive into your story.
My name is Emily, right? I'm from Ireland. And so I'm the founder of the Evolutionary Intelligence Academy. And it really centers around personal, collective, and global evolution. And it ignites heart, mind, body, and soul.
I want to understand a little bit of context about your earliest years and how you developed your relationship with your own creativity. Like, what did that mean for you? How was that expressed? And at what point was it its highest and most kind of naturally moving through you? And then at what point did you start to reject it in, service of, for lack of better phrasing, what you think you should do or what the world tells you you should be doing?
To start at the beginning, I suppose. So I grew up in Ireland in the, will I tell the decade? I don't really want to tell the decade. A long time ago. And when I was growing up, I grew up in a conservative Catholic context, right? However, I had a little bit of a different kind of angle on the upbringing that I had, which is that my dad was Protestant and my mom was Catholic. And in Ireland, all right, it was the 70s and 80s. In those years, that was a big deal, especially in the 70s, to have a Protestant and Catholic marry was against both creeds, if you like, and certainly both societies. So I grew up in a sense in a world, Brooke, where love kind of governed everything else in terms of that love was the higher intelligence here. Love was my parents, my mom and dad followed their hearts to stay with each other and be with each other. And thankfully, I'm very grateful, help bring myself and my siblings into the world, right? So I grew up as the eldest of four. And I was always, I suppose, really, I never identified. It's so interesting when you use the word creativity. I never really identified myself as creative because I always, as a child, would have thought of that as like being artistic and I can't draw to save my life. Like I'm disaster, the stick man. Do you know what I mean? Whereas actually the truth of the matter is when I look back on it, like I was always very dramatic, which maybe you might see in this conversation, but like I was into drama in a big way. And I think that was part of my heart and soul was communication, obviously. I think my earliest memory, it's so funny because I haven't thought of this in a while, but when you mentioned the question, that image just popped up. So I'm going to share it. So the moment I think well, two moments actually. One comes to, and they're all around the same age, around 6 and 7, where I was firstly singing in my first Holy Communion. And first Holy Communion is when it's like a threshold blessing in the Catholic Church where you are at the age of 6 or so, 7 maybe, are, receive the Eucharist. And this is a very important ritual and ceremony within the Catholic faith. But I remember my heart was so open and is so eager and determined to contribute by singing my little heart out. And I did, but I had such bad singing because I was trying so hard and trying so hard because I was earnest in it. And so that was, and then I remember somebody turned around and saying, shh, keep it down. And I remember that was one of the first times my voice was quieted. The second time that comes to mind, which came through when you asked the question, was when I was chosen around about the same time, I might have been 8, to be like the star in the play, right? And when I say the star, I was the character about which a story was being told by the whole class. And I was sitting there, standing there, and I was in front of everybody, and I was waiting for my moment. I had one thing to do, which was to scream dramatically at a very particular moment. And I was so busy, everyone's parents in the room, all the class together. I was so busy enjoying the fact that I was on the stage. I missed my one moment completely. Everyone was just looking at me going, how did you get that wrong? Like, so I remember those seeding moments as like moments where you can't get it wrong. Like you can't be a human being. There has to be kind of perfection. And here at society, I mean, much programming also, as you know, goes into our upbringings. Naturally, every single human being has this experience. But there were very specific moments where the message of quieten your voice, get it right, like there were very clear moments in my heart that went in as a little girl. So I would say that was, in my essence, I was always a communicator. I was always dramatic, and I was always connected to the essence and the energy of life. But I learned to divorce myself as soon as I felt like rejection from society. That was very, very important. Looking back as a kind of one of those kind of key moments, I would say.
So moving forward with your story, and you just shared about that point of rejecting and positioning yourself in a almost a defensive way or a safe way against other people's judgments. And so you ended up doubling down on all of the things that you thought you should do or needed to do in order to be successful. So can you share a little bit about your evolution in, or I don't know if evolution is the right word to use for that, but your experience in that space, and then the turning point that where things blew up and you had an opportunity to redefine yourself and go on that path of discovery where you have another really powerful story to share.
Sometimes we think when we're doing something like doubling down on something, we look back and go, that wasn't really who I was. And we sometimes think that that's not evolution, but actually it is evolution because we have to, and this is often what the 20s are for. I'm not saying we don't have it later, we do, but this experience of the turn of the spiral of our lives, the timelines of our lives, it's not a linear timeline, although it appears that way, but it's more like an evolutionary turn of the spiral where we go through the contrast of needing to understand who we are not in order that the next turn of the spiral comes around where we can calibrate with who we are. And so it's in a sense a necessary piece of the journey. So I just really think that's a very important kind of anchor point to this whole conversation. There's nothing wrong with contrast. There's nothing wrong. So I really want to validate anyone who's listening who may be feeling like I'm in a quagmire right now. I don't know who I am. I don't know where I'm going. And I feel stuck. And I just want to say nothing has gone wrong. It's just you're in contrast and you're on that particular turn of the spiral.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Because
Oh,
I think,
yeah.
especially with a
You're
lot
welcome.
of creatives, this concept of perfectionism is something
Yes.
that's like poisonous for us.
Yes.
So
Yes, it
I really
is.
appreciate you saying that no, just the learning process is part of that evolutionary process. I think
Yes, it
that
is.
that's really important to call out. So thank you.
Yes, yes, yes. And perfectionism, like, oh my goodness, and productivity, like excessive productivity. It's like toxic perfectionism, toxic productivity. Like, we'll talk about the structures of our society and how we're functioning a little bit later, and how that is so toxic to the entrepreneur, so toxic to the creative in particular. Um, but I'm going to just circle back to your question around, and I love your phrase, doubling down. So I doubled down on that piece. For me, the contrast in my experience was doubling down on I will repress who I am in order to fit into society because I need to be successful in order to be loved and to fit into the program, right? So for me, what that looked like was I doubled down on going as fast as my little legs could carry me up the corporate ladder, burning out at 24, like so young. When I say burning out, like just to quantify that, meaning I was off work for 5 months straight, 3 months full time, and another 2 months part time. And during those 3 months, I couldn't walk across the room. It was intense for someone so young and so like just wanting to get to the top. So that anyway, as a result of that experience, then you'd think I'd learn, but no, and that's okay as well. So it's like, no, I'm not going to learn that I can't trash myself to the point and ignore who I am in order to get to the top. What I did was I went back in for another round. So I recovered for a couple of years and then I went back in for another round. Now that was a shorter time, but really there came a point, Brooke, where it was like 2 rounds of that. And then, okay, what's next? So the universe or life or your inner being or wisdom or even evolutionary intelligence sends you very clear messages. And those messages come to you through the still small voice. And if you don't listen the first time, okay, it gets bigger and it keeps getting bigger until you finally get the message. So for me, like burning out at 24, being off work for 5 months, that's pretty loud. It's a pretty clear signal, right? But I still wasn't able to hear it. The second time, I also wasn't able to hear it. So the third time, it kind of went like this. Like, what do you do when someone doesn't like get those messages, right? The third time, it has to like get even more dramatic. I had this experience where I was working really late one night and doing a marketing role for a technology company, which for anyone who knows me, neither of those things are my forte. It's like so extreme. It's like, what were you doing? Like, it doesn't even take two brain cells to figure out you're wrong for that job. Anyway, I was working really late at night. It was about 8 p.m. And when I was sitting there, I thought I was on my own. So as I was sitting there, I was typing a technical document, hilarious, and incompetently, no doubt. And then next minute, I hear this voice in the other room, and its voice just went, "Oh my God, there just has to be something more than this." Like, there was just anguish in this voice. It's like, there has to be something more than this. And I was really taken aback because firstly, I thought I was on my own. Secondly, I was really struck by the vibrational notes, meaning the energy and the emotion behind it. I can't even bring that emotion to it in this moment. It was such a particular frequency. And I stopped and then it's just the second wave of kind of shock came to me, which is that I realized I had said those words. And what had occurred was an actual interior split where my personality was continuing to work on technical documents, but my soul, my heart and soul, well, it was my heart really connecting, just was like, I cannot do this anymore. We're done. And so that became the clarion call, Brooke, for me to really get real and make a decision. So I think it's in The Alchemist that quote is there is when you make an aligned choice, all the universe conspires to make it happen. And what happened was I made a decision there and then. It's like, I have to go traveling and see the world. Like, it was only in my late 20s. I was like, I have to go traveling and see the world. So I didn't tell anyone though, because I was in the middle of doing exams. But within, like, I think it was certainly within about 10 days, there was a call from the general manager of the business unit, and he called everyone into the room. It was all very somber energy. And then he was just like, "So I'm really sorry, guys, but unfortunately, the business results are not there." It was right at the time of the dot-com crash. And he was like, "Unfortunately, we're going to have to open up a voluntary redundancy scheme." At which point I was like, I put my hand up. I was like, "I'll go." I like practically hurdled the desk to get the check from him, right? Because I'm just like, deadly, I'm out of here, and paid to do so. So it was so brilliant. So I set off on this trip around the world. It was going to be my 1 year trip around the world. And 2 weeks into that trip, Brooke, I decided I was going to go with my friends who I'd met over there on a whitewater river rafting journey. And it was going to be the best day of our lives. It didn't quite work out that way. We basically got into the boat. The boat had a freak accident, capsized. I was separated from the boat and pulled into a rip current, separated from everybody else. The boat was fully upside down. Everybody was in the water.
And where were you? Where in the world were you at this point?
We were in Ecuador. Yeah, we were in Ecuador. So we were going down the Baños River, which is just right through the center and through the avenue of volcanoes in the center of Ecuador. And these were in grade 5 and 6 rapids. So have you done whitewater rafting? Do you
No,
know?
not my
Okay.
jam.
Okay, no,
In part because I fear the story you're about to tell. I'm like, I don't think I would like that.
listen, it's not mine either anymore. So what happened? Rapids basically, when you're looking at whitewater rafting, it goes from levels 1 to 6, and so one is like hardly movement, and then 6 is kamikaze. Like, really, even some of the most expert people in the world have to get out of the boat sometimes to be able to navigate the boat through the waters while they walk along the shore, which is exactly what happened in our case. So we had no experience. We had been on grade 4, I think, once. I was on grade 3 in Austria once a long time ago before that. And then in this instance, we were thrown into grade 5 and 6 rapids. We also, because it was South America at the time, it was many years ago, but at the time there was not that much emphasis put on safety. So there was no safety boat. I'm sure they wanted to save dollars. And so we were suddenly in the middle of chaos. So all I knew was that I was underwater and I was being crushed by massive tons of volume of water into very, very small spaces. My helmet was immediately ripped off. My elbow was smashed against a rock underwater. I didn't even know what happened. I just knew suddenly I couldn't breathe. So the rest of the crew were all thrown over. That to tell the whole story from all perspectives would take too long, but it's almost a movie. I could write a movie about it. It's extraordinary how we all survived. But basically, the long and the short of it is, as they say in Ireland, I was pulled 2 kilometers downstream in those conditions. And very quickly, I started to lose consciousness. So all of the life force started to leave. I was hypoxic. So all the life force started to leave my arms and legs. And I could feel that I was my vision started to go, so it started to get blurred. And I was trying desperately to breathe, because what happens is it's not like the sea where you can see a wave coming. It's the opposite. It's like you going along, and then suddenly the jaws of the monster beside you, underneath you, behind you. And so you're pulled under the water, not the water doesn't come over, you're pulled into the water like that. So the long and the short of it was I basically had a death experience. And I, as I felt myself starting to leave my body, I started going, oh my God, this is it. This is it. And I was quite upset and distressed because it's very distressing not to be able to breathe and then to just get a gasp and then to be pulled under again and then to try and breathe with all that water. It's so confusing. So I couldn't see the boat anywhere. I was in the middle of virgin jungle. I was alone. And 4 thoughts went through my mind. Number one, oh my God, my poor little sister. Like they will never let her out of the house because she's an adventurer. Number two, I really hope they find my body because this is going to be really hard for my parents if they don't. They didn't even know where I was. Number three, but what a beautiful place to die. And this is when I was really leaving. It was like, what a beauty. It's just me and Mother Nature. And I felt so deeply returned back to her. Like, we say to return back to the soil. That's what, except it was back to the water. But like that piece of like just me and Mother Earth. And there was one thought that pierced through all of that. And that thought was, oh my God, I just started living. I spent my whole life living for society's definition of who I am. And I just started to breathe in the last 2 weeks. And now I'm dying. And this sucks. And then after I had already let go of my emotional body and my emotional psyche, my psyche had already kind of started to, and it was like the psyche reached up and just pierced through and connected with my being for a moment. And that anger coming through to that peaceful place was as like somehow connected, brought me back online a little bit. And then next minute there was a bang. And then suddenly I'm like unconscious, coming to consciousness in the bottom of this boat. Weirdly. And this weird thing happened where like none of my arms and legs couldn't work because I was hypoxic, and I just basically left and I'd started moving up towards the light, as they say, right? And I look out the boat, and one of the guys is standing there like I'm hallucinating. I'm like, he's going, would anyone like mayonnaise on the sandwich? And I was like, oh God, I was so sick. I was like so ill because I look, it's like, is that real? But actually, what happened was there were sandwiches in the dry bag. So when the boat capsized, they actually stayed dry. And he was actually standing there going, would anyone like mayonnaise in their sandwiches? And I could barely like put two thoughts together. So we were left on the side of the jungle brook for like 5 hours while the guide went back to try and save the other people. Now, it's a long story and there's a miracle in that whole day. But basically, he told me I had about 90 seconds to live before I was going to die. So, like, it was absolutely bona fide. 9 Belgian people, God rest their souls, 9 Belgian people had drowned in that exact spot the previous year. So, this is extreme, 100% real situation. As you can imagine, it catapulted me into the big questions. It's like after I took many weeks to kind of process, I was like looking back, going, I can't go back to society's rules. Where the hell am I going? And that started the quest for evolutionary intelligence, which I didn't know what it was at the time, but it started the quest for meaning and purpose and to answer the big existential questions of life. Like, who am I really? If I'm not that, then who am I really? Why am I here? What is my purpose? And it was quite a journey. I thought I could solve it by putting a spreadsheet together and giving myself 6 weeks to read all the Eastern philosophy books.
Oh, hi, corporate Emily. Spreadsheet should fix this. So you got the message slash didn't quite know how to work with the message yet.
Exactly. Seriously, it was a very rational project plan. It was 6 weeks I was giving myself to find the meaning of life. I was going to read all the books. I was going to summarize each into a paragraph. I was going to get a composite of all the paragraphs. And then I was done because I'm busy. So I got to get on with life, but I have the answer.
Mm-hmm.
That was my strategy. And it's a
Yeah.
good strategy, but it just doesn't work that
Yeah.
way.
I mean,
Yeah.
since this podcast is focused a lot on entrepreneurs, a strategy on paper is very different than the reality of the world. And a strategy must remain flexible and dynamic in order for it to serve you. Because if not, it keeps you in this kind of tunnel vision of how you think things should be and how they should happen. But that's not where growth is. It's not following the shoulds. The growth is where you allow for more of the freedom and flexibility to be revealed so that you can then
Mm.
work with it.
Yes, yes. And also, there's a piece that kind of precedes that. And this is why, like, all of this contrast served in the end, even though it was tricky at the time. But there's a piece that precedes that strategic bit, which is where is the strategy sourced from? And what aspects of life require a strategy that's mostly using mental function, which is awesome because we're not losing mind and we're not losing practicality. However, there's also vibrational strategy, energetic strategy, essence strategy. And that's very important that we combine those two, that we don't miss one or the other, that we have both. So that's part of the body of work that is evolutionary intelligence. So that's why I love you and I talking together, because I think we really have that down, right? That's what it's about, Brooke. Like, it's about combining professional excellence with your essential brilliance. In other words, your professional skill with the essential light of your being, who you are, so you can become fully expressed in this world. That's
Yeah.
what it's about.
Is that how you would define evolutionary intelligence?
So evolutionary intelligence functions in many different levels, much like consciousness, right? So evolutionary intelligence, we can say, is a field of energy and information. We want to take it all the way out. It's a field of energy and information that has the answers to everything that you need in your life right now. Okay, so that's the biggest. And if you like, we can call that universal mind, but it's a specific frequency and a specific dynamics within that. However, that's all the way out. I want to bring it right back into the practical now, which is that EVIQ. So we call evolutionary intelligence EVI. For you, we want to increase your EVIQ, which means that we want to increase the degree to which you're connected to your own evolutionary intelligence. So how does that show up? That shows up like the evolutionary impulse calling you right now. So what is it that's calling you in your life right now? And there's many different ways that we can, lenses that we can use to look at that. Let's use a simple practical one. You may have a calling to give up sugar, and you know that you need to do that, but that sugar piece is maybe, no, I'm really enjoying it. It's Christmas. And let's be fair, it is Christmas. But it's like you might be called to give up sugar. You might be called to get fit. You might be called to leave that relationship that's not working for you. You might be called to change location. You might be called to leave that job or role, job, that's been keeping you stuck. There are a lot that's just real practical, immediate, grounded evolutionary intelligence. Is like, I got to stop being in denial of the thing that I know I need to do in order to come into alignment with the next step of my journey, the next step of the turn of the spiral. That's the most present practical piece. So for your listeners, I would invite you to really tune in to the essence of your being now and really come to conscious awareness. What is it that you know you need to do to come into alignment and honor you, period? So this is the first practical piece, and there's a journey between that everyday piece and then the true realization of evolutionary intelligence, where you experience yourself being led as the multidimensional being that you are by your own inner being in a pristinely clear way. So that's a journey to get between those two things, right? But in between that journey, there's sustainability, personal sustainability, there's deeper purpose, there's navigating new ways of being, there's different steps in that journey. We can get into that a little bit more later if you like. So
Yeah.
happy to share that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of people speak about that inner knowing as their intuition, right? Like that thing that they can feel, that they know is bigger than just their minds or their brains or whatever. Like it comes from a different space. Can you share a little bit about how do you move through from that realization and that recognition into then being able to actually live it?
So let's go to your question around, or the piece that you began with, which was around intuition. So I really want to create some architecture for people around this, because not everybody finds it easy to follow intuition. And how do you distinguish between emotion and intuition? Like, what's the difference, right? Okay, so that's a big one. So emotion comes through, if you think of it more like a chemical experience, and it tends to be in the outer extremities of the body, right? So it can be more like the gut or the solar plexus. Also, if you think about anger, it's like, whoa, like this, right? The fists come up, right? So there's like an extremity involved in that. There's also like, yeah, the fists also go up, right? When you're like winning, is it like just pick an emotion, somewhere in there, there's going to be that kind of chemical orientation to the experience. Whereas intuition is something that runs much more electrically, and it runs through the central channel of the body, right? So it's more through the nervous system rather than the chemistry. So, and this is so key, Brooke, because when you are looking to make decisions, you, beautiful being that you are, you have direct connection to your own inner being, direct connection to your own inner being, and your own inner being has higher sight, right? It can see beyond what you can see in your personality, right? A little bit like in your personality, think of it like air traffic controllers. You're like an air traffic controller. You can see what's on your radar, right? I mean, you can see because it's beeping there, but your higher self can see beyond what's on your radar. It has higher sight, right? So this is a very important dynamic. So your inner being speaks to you through the language of resonance. So that means that when you feel resonance flowing through that central channel through your nervous system with that clear goosebumps, chills, clarity, resonance feeling, like vibrational feeling, that means it's a yes. Whatever you're looking at, whatever stimuli it is, whether you're considering, whether you're listening to what somebody's saying, or whether you're considering a direction, for example, a job role or a business idea, right? As you look at that, if you're feeling resonance with that direction, that means you're right on track. Your inner being has you on that. It's communicating, yes, that's the one, right? So that's very, very different to the space of emotional reactivity, or, it's a completely different kind of ball game, right? So just want to make that distinction right off the bat, if that's helpful.
Yeah, very much.
It's kind of cool, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
it's a simple, and this is where I really want to also presence that there are simple, practical inner technologies like that, right? To understand your own interior architecture, to understand how it works, and how you can make decisions that are in alignment with your highest creative purpose. That is the piece. These inner technologies are the thing that are going to take you from a life that is full of contrast and resistance into a life that's full of flow. And it's not that you never experience resistance, but you know what it is and you know what it's telling you, right? So that's the difference. So that's the shift from becoming overwhelmed by life and the world and becoming led by evolutionary intelligence in your own inner being. That's a game changer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautiful.
So that's the first piece. So the second piece then, what was your question again? Remind me.
I'm what I'm trying to get to is the space between recognizing that resonance and having that realization, and then
Yeah,
being able to live the life that's in that vision. Like how do you
yeah.
move through that messy middle? Essentially, is
Mhm.
is the question.
Yeah. What's really important to know is, first of all, you have clarity about where you are, right? So it's very important not to make resistance wrong, right? Being with all parts of yourself, being with that contrast is absolutely part of the journey. And we want to include that in our experience, right? We really want to include that experience. We want to understand that that's valuable. That tells you where you are, locating where you are. Okay, the first piece is, let's say you have received an inspired idea. You know what it is that you want to do, but there's resistance there. So in a sense, you've begun orientation, that orientation to that soul inspired idea or that business idea or that creative idea. So you have your orientation down, but here you are in a location that's not aligned with that. So how do you navigate? First of all, let's understand what resistance is. Resistance is the gap between what you're seeing about the current situation or the current idea, right? The current idea, and what your inner being is seeing, right? So as you initially receive the resonance of that idea, and the inspiration, and that is that feeling as you have that intuitive impulse running through your central nervous system, as you have that experience, that is saying, this is it, this is right on track. Then we move out of that inspired state and we drop into a lower vibration, and then we find ourselves, yeah, but I'm sitting here and I'm here and now, and how do I get to there? So can we just honor all parts of ourselves and invite that resistant part of us to have a voice and really ask it, like, what is it saying? Like, what does it need? What part of you needs this support? It could be your inner child, it could be the teenager, it could be the crone. It could be any part of you that's not really been given enough of a voice, right? So rather than ignoring it and suppressing it, can we just really get some quiet, still space and give it a voice and to journal? So a really helpful thing to do can be to journal, to give that voice, right? So I don't know if you've had experience of that yourself, Brooke, but do you resonate with that? Do you get that, how important it is not to bypass that piece?
I get how important it is now, but I didn't. It's only a newer realization because I had interpreted resistance, oftentimes falsely, as also my intuition. Like, oh, well, deep down there's something there that's saying, nope, not for you. And then only recently in alignment with my own personal development and growth, coming to the place where I recognize that I can't leave parts of myself behind. Like it's a all or nothing kind of a journey. And when you reject parts of yourself, you fracture yourself. And so you have this feeling of being off or of not knowing your strength or your power or your capacity because you're fractured.
Yes, I love that. Well said, really well said. So that then to ensure wholeness and include all parts and give voice to all parts. What you'll find is the part that's in resistance, now, it can be a couple of things going on. We want to explore a couple of different directions here because I think this is important because your listeners will have their own individual experience, unique experience. So if this is you, listener, I invite you to really tune in and to really give yourself, in a sense, the space to really sense which one of these might be you or might apply to you. And the first piece is like really recognizing that sometimes that voice is actually saying something very important. Like, for example, let's say you don't like the process of completing your taxes at the end of the year, right? Who likes that, in fairness? I mean, not many people, right? Especially creative people. However, so there's a part of us that goes into resistance. This is one aspect that can come up. There's a part of us that goes into resistance that because it's like, oh, it's so boring, or like I can't stand admin or whatever. And I'm sure I know there are going to be people laughing at this and recognizing, yeah, no,
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh,
really.
right here. Hi. I
Yeah,
literally
right?
hired a bookkeeper and an accountant
Yeah,
this week because I'm
yeah,
like, it needs to be done, but I don't
yeah,
want to do it.
yeah. Well, sometimes, you know what, and that's one pathway you can take.
Yeah.
And there's also another pathway, which is actually the point here is to give voice to that part of you. So that's a very practical solution that will take care of that. So you have listened to that voice and you've taken action. Another part might be actually, for me, I don't want to have a lack of understanding in this area. And actually, one of the most important things is that piece of that voice, that part of me is actually very valid because it wants to keep me safe. It wants to keep me grounded in the world. And there's some part of my path that's going to require me to be very familiar, not with the details of being an accountant, because that's not my job. I'm a creative entrepreneur, but to have the essentials and the basics of finance grounded and in my basic understanding so that I can, for example, instruct an accountant or instruct whatever,
Yeah.
fill in the
Or
blank.
recognize if something's off. Yeah.
Yeah, precisely. So that there's different solution pathways, but the point is behind the solution pathways is what you and I both did in this instance is give voice to that part of ourselves that is actually in resistance, that's actually trying to keep us safe in this instance. There can also be another point where when you actually, it's a wonderful bonus and a benefit and empowerment piece in this is that when you finally sit down and do that thing you know you need to do, right? When you work with the resistance, go, do you know what? You're dead right. I've been resisting because XYZ. Let's give this voice. Let's move forward into taking the action. When you take action and you master that thing, when you realize actually that whole thing was an illusion and actually I quite really like being on top of my financial game in my business, there's such empowerment and it can never again hold you limited, right? So this is the thing, Brooke. So now you move into a new realm where now you're a creative entrepreneur who's grounded in the practical world, who is no longer struggling with that contrast and that resistance because you went to it and through it and came out the other side of it. And now you have greater capability and capacity in the world. Now you actually have a greater energetic capability to draw in more finances because you're not in resistance to finance.
Yeah.
Listen to that for a link,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So because you
Absolutely.
have
Yeah.
upgraded your internal energetic container, psychic container for financial capacity, more money must come in,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Such an interesting one.
Yeah. And it's such a different angle that I'm used to hearing, which is more the face your fears and, conquer it. It's like this dominating masculine language of just like "Rawr." Energetically it feels like that instead of the way that I'm feeling right now as you're explaining this is this softening and expansion happening to create more spaciousness rather than dominate it so it doesn't hurt you anymore.
Yes, well said. You should do a show about this. You are
I should
really,
have
that
a
is
podcast or
so well.
something.
You should have a podcast. One day, no, this is brilliant. You've said it perfectly. That's exactly right. So this is a beautiful way of including, which is a feminine principle, the inclusion and the unwinding. So that's also look at the spiral, right? It's an unwinding. That's also a feminine principle. The softening is a feminine principle. And by the way, we're not saying men and women here. And this is so important because I just get really tired of that whole gender being in opposition with one another. That's before we even get into the expanded non-binary gender conversation. Like it's just like, so we're talking about energetics here. We're talking about the unwinding process that can happen in any human being. We're talking about the softening of resistance. And in fact, what happens is as we engage, include, give voice to, and allow to gently unwind, what happens is resistance liquefies. Resistance liquefies. And then you realize that actually that contrast at the beginning has been the basis for your expansion into this greater capacity now. You'll never again be held hostage by that thing you didn't understand that gave you that contrast. You've now expanded into a more evolved, evolutionary, creative entrepreneur.
Yeah. I love the language that you use around that also to liquefy because the image that came to my mind was flow, was like a river or, something like that that just not so much the white water rafting river, but maybe another like sit in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
inner
yeah.
tube and float kind of a river, but it's this
Yeah,
sense of flow,
yeah,
like it's effortless.
yeah. Exactly. Exactly. It's flow, it's ease, it's grace. And in a sense, but before that, because that's kind of quite advanced in the current, earlier in the current, if you think about like a dam bursting, it's like relief.
Mm-hmm.
It starts at relief. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I can do that. It's like, this is
Yeah.
not that complicated. And
Yeah.
now I feel liberated. It's a great feeling. Yeah.
So I'm quite aware that there are a lot of people in my audience that are at that stage where they don't have clarity on what their North Star is, what that vision is. They're blocked or stuck or confused or lost or unable to connect with that deeper part of themselves. So can you share a little bit about some of the practical tools or approaches that my listeners can consider to deepen that connection with evolutionary intelligence?
So the first thing that comes to mind, firstly, just to share, totally resonate, totally recognize 100% being in your shoes. It is such a familiar place to me. So I know for sure that you will navigate your way through this. I know that for sure. And I just want to send that line of certainty right through here because we have the map. It's here. And there are many maps, but there is a specific map here that might help you like right now in this moment. So I think the first thing is to really understand, there's really 5 steps to this. The first one is locate, right? So what this is about recognizing that inside your interior is locate where you are. Recognize that inside your interior, something specific is happening, right? There's a feeling of dissatisfaction or insufficiency with current reality. And there's a yearning in your heart, maybe, that is calling you to something. And this is a real, actual location in the journey. So we want to locate you right here, right now, exactly where you are. So that disconnect between current reality and the heart's calling is indicative that a journey is calling you, right? So when you're setting out on a journey, it's very, I like to think of it like kind of like a voyage. Okay. So as you and I both said already, Brooke, that still small voice, it ain't going to get quieter, it's going to get louder. So we have to just acknowledge, okay, there's a journey being called here, there's a clarion call going out for you. And it's a decision to engage with that journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or life will kick you in the ass the way it did to me, right? Right? It's not going away. So
Yeah, the ass, the
locate,
elbow, the head, the lung, like
yeah,
you
the
got
head, the
shit
stomach,
kicked out of you.
all direction, all directions. So until you listen, because
Yeah.
you are not just your personality, you are a soul, you are a being, you are a being incarnated. That means you're in flesh, in body. And so the personality, which is the ego aspect of ourselves, tries to run the show. That was me back in the corporate world, trying to run up the corporate ladder and ignoring all of the calls until I had my death experience, and then I couldn't ignore it anymore. And so the soul eventually reaches down and says, right, that's enough personality, I'm taking over. And that's when the message comes and it becomes non-negotiable. So let's locate you exactly where you are without having to go to a death experience.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Right? Yeah, it's helpful. Okay, so right here, right now, where you are is perfect. So before you set out on a voyage, you need to build a boat. And how do you build a boat? You need to have a boat for stability. So we begin by getting practical, that this is not something that you just get done in a timeline like a 6-week spreadsheet. This is an actual investment in your life's purpose, your deeper purpose, who you are as a being. So if you take a moment right now and reflect back on how much time you've spent and how old are you, however old you are, as you're listening to this, how long have you spent up until this moment investing in maybe society's programs? Now it's time to listen to your soul's programs, your soul's source codes, right? And so that requires stability. And what is that personal sustainability? It's really having clarity that you need an inner anchor before an outer plan. That means you must have practical stability. So you need to have physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual supports. You also need practical supports. So for example, what that can look like is, okay, I know on this journey it's a bit uncertain for me. So I need to, for example, one pathway, I'm just using this as an example, go part-time in my current employment if I'm employed, or maybe take my work down in my business a little bit so I can take some time out to go deeper into myself, but have the baseline practicality of physical stability and well-being financially there. And then bring in support so that you have your physical support, like physical therapy for your body, or you have ways of processing your emotions, etc., etc. So you build your boat so you have practical structures to support your physical, mental, emotional, energetic, and spiritual well-being on this journey, on this quest for deeper purpose. That's the first piece. Locate where you are, understand what the interior call is, build your boat, right? Have practical supports in place. Second part of this journey is you really begin to orient, right? So you're orienting. What's your orientation? Your orientation is to your North Star. What's your North Star? Your soul, your inner being, who you are in your essence, right? And all that is the clarity that that is where you're being called to. That is where you're being called to. And so it's just bringing that front and center, Brooke. And whether that's putting in on a poster in your room, on creating some kind of physical, practical location like an altar space or a ritual space where you can physically go, where you go, no, I'm going here because I'm going to listen to my inner being. I'm going to listen to the calling of my soul, right? So that's the second step in the journey is, okay, we've located, now we've oriented. The third part is navigation, right? So if you can imagine, like you've built your boat, you've left the land, you're now on your way to your North Star, but you've got to navigate the bit in the middle. And that navigation of the bit in the middle is where you've left the solidity, and this is super important. You've left the solidity of the known. And what is the known? The known is the social structures and programs. You are not necessarily able to bring a brilliant genius soul frequency idea into physical reality yet, but something's coming. You can sense something's coming. And that it's the trusting in the intangible. And that is quite a process. So I want to drop in here that if you are in this place where you know you're on a journey, you know your soul's calling you, but you're not quite sure how it's showing up yet, trust the journey, trust the process. I want to name the intangible space in between the two worlds of the old way that you've been living and the new way you're going to live. That intangible watery space, like crossing the voyage of the seas in between, is an emotional place. It is an energetic place. It is a place where you are learning to listen deeply within to your soul's language, right? So this goes back to the resonance that we spoke about. I'm also going to give a couple of things in here. I want to invite your listener, you, the beautiful listener on this journey, to listen into the three S's, right? And the three S's are as follows. In this intangible navigation space, you must create space from the world. You must find silence in your day, and you must find stillness in your body. When you can tap into that and build that basic starting point as a practice into your day, you're beginning to create a container on your interior to receive the intuitive impulse of your soul. And that right there is the starting of the receptivity. Yes, the starting point. Another piece that you can do in this space is to truly call upon your spiritual guidance. And not everybody's into the word spiritual. I want to put this in another way. Higher frequency, consciousness, awareness, noble thoughts, genius ideas, right? How do you access genius ideas? As you come into that space of the three S's, you use the techniques of whether it's prayer or listening to music or opening your heart. It's always opening your heart. Dance might be your way. You might be more embodied. Whatever it is, to raise your vibration, giving, blessing, really offering generosity to other people, right? From your heart. As you raise your frequency, you begin to become what we call a vibrational match to those noble ideas, the soul receptivity, the inspired thought. And it is there that you can begin to pull down the fragments of energy, the filaments of energy that are the starting points of evolutionary intelligence becoming manifest. That's part 3. Part 4 is you begin to apply, right? So you move from that space of navigation into the front. When you've had that receptivity, you then begin applying it. This means that you begin testing things out in the world, right? In a practical world, it would be, we would call it piloting an idea. Bit early to pilot an idea, but you begin applying these principles in practical everyday reality.
Yeah. I think that's the space that I usually enter into my client's journey, is
Right.
that space in between where they know there's something there, but they don't have the tangible thing yet, and they don't know how to build it,
Yes.
and they recognize they need support. And so a lot of times people come to me with that ambiguous energy of like, I don't know exactly what I need yet, but I just like, I had to start this conversation. And so that piece, I
Yes.
feel resonant with that, because everything you're saying so far, I'm like, I try to support as much as I can. But once it gets to that place where they're ready to pilot, they're ready to build, they're ready to translate all of that work
Yes.
that nobody else can do for them. That is
Yeah.
internal work. When they're
Yes.
ready to match that internal work with the external tangibility of, how do I make a website or a program or a customer journey or whatever, that's the place where I'm privileged enough to be able to step in and help them with that last bit before they're able
Amazing.
to really fully own it and drive it.
Amazing, Brooke. And I think that's why you and I have met in this conversation, because I think that you take that and do that so beautifully, support people so beautifully to making real. And the piece that I do is the piece before that, which is to get the clarity of what is the source energy? What are the source codes of you, the you-ness of you, that beautiful essence of who you are? How do we take those frequency codes and activate them through the language of joy and resonance and abundance and well-being and offering of value and support and service in the world from the truth of who you are,
Yeah, the
through
inside
the
out.
lens of your professional excellence,
Yeah,
then into practical systems and structures. That's
exactly.
really the line. It's from the energy, clear energy of the intangibility of the energy. However, people think intangible is invaluable. It's the opposite. You begin with energy. All things are energy. The atom is 99% energy and 1% matter. So you get the energy right. And then you're able to bleed that energy all the way through into professional excellence, which then becomes programs and offerings and systems and
Yeah.
structures, right?
Yep.
And so that's why I think you and I are in this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
is that we meet each other perfectly
Yeah.
there, right?
Yeah.
So that's beautiful. And I think there can be a little bit of a window between having that interior clarity about the essence of who you are and maybe having received that idea. There's a little bit of a testing period before they can maybe even get to speak to you a little bit, which is like a little bit of like, can I trust this? And that's really key. I see this time and time again with people. Can I trust this frequency information, vibrational information, energetic impulse, intuitive sense, and how do I even language it, right? So that's for myself. And so those pieces are all so important. And how can I then, and this is where again there's many levels of practicality to this, but how can I then allow myself to begin to make decisions in the world based on trusting intuitive information more than data from the world? And that piece is crucial. This is absolutely key, because people get lost where then the mind suddenly goes, oh, I got to put a company together. So now I'm going to invert everything again and put systems ahead of who I am. And you have to be very important not to mix that up.
Yeah. Oh, I don't,
I'm
I
sure you
don't take those projects anymore. I used to. I used
did
to take
you?
those projects and they weren't fulfilling. And I like it didn't activate that inner genius in me. It didn't touch
Right.
that place in me. It just felt like, okay,
Yes.
I'm just churning jobs. So now I
Yes.
work with people who have done that work. So much so that the
Yes.
tagline of my business is design your life and work from the inside out. I work where the woo meets the work. Like
I love it.
that's it.
I
That's
love it. I
because
love
it's
it.
so important, because otherwise,
Yes.
even if the business is successful, quote unquote
Yeah.
successful, make a lot of money, it's stable, grows, whatever, you get a lot of attention, you've built yourself a golden cage and you come to resent it, and eventually you'll sabotage it.
That's
like, or you're
exactly right.
sabotage yourself. And I
That's
don't want
exactly
anything
right.
to do with that cycle anymore. I needed to excuse
Brilliant.
myself from that cycle in order to step in to the next level of my own evolution.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Well, fair play to you. You're a walking, living embodiment to this, Brooke. I love it.
I'm on the journey.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But fair play. And likewise, I've been through that experience also where I had, clients come in who were not really wanting to go deep. And I'm really only interested in going deep, right? For people who are really wanting to go to the essence of who they are. It's a lesson for us all, isn't it? But I think once we have like tasted it, and when the people are lucky enough to come and, for example, meet someone like you who can help them make that really systemic, like in a business structure, that's so gold, Brooke. And that's the work you do is so valuable from that perspective because, it's another level of what we would call gravity to balance the levity, right? Gravity, practical systems to balance the levity, which is the essence of who you are coming through as professional excellence. So all of this is interrelated. And I think the final piece then of the journey is really just where you move from again, remembering what the 5 steps are, the location piece, then we're going into orientation, then we're going into navigation, right? Then we're applying, right? And then we land. And the landing is the beautiful threshold where, as you and I both know, you finally no longer are even 1% invested in the old way of being and the old way of functioning, but you've now landed in new reality. And that new reality is now informing your every breath, and that you are fully integrated into this world as a soul, fully clearly aligned. And that's where your luminosity comes through. That's where your heart shines. You have joy, and you cannot help be magnetic. And as a result of that authentic, luminous magnetism, you attract abundance beyond your wildest dreams because it's now the truth of who you are that the whole world's getting, not just a part of you. So you see how way back there at the start of the journey, the logic was confining you so much. Yeah. The logic and the limitation of all that material, in inverted commas, certainty, the certainty of that material reality was actually what blocked your abundant material reality. It comes full circle.
Yeah. Yep. I tell my clients to design their life and business based on what they ultimately truly are aligned with, not just on what they think is available for them. Because that's the small mind, that's the logic of like, well, I can't do that. Like why
Yes.
not? I did. Like you think it's not
Mm,
available to you? Why? It was available to
mm.
me. I'm no different than
Yes,
you. Like
exactly.
it's that
Exactly.
that expansive expanding that gives room for you to access possibilities that you couldn't see before.
Exactly.
So, can you tell us a little bit more, just as we're coming to an end here and really, arriving, like landing the plane? You
Yeah,
have
land the
a
plane.
you have a program that I'm enthusiastically going to be participating in Q1 of 2024. Um, and can you share a little bit about what is that program? What does it entail? And if somebody feels resonance with what you've shared today, what is the point of entry for somebody to learn more and perhaps participate?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to share this. Like, I'm so passionate about this book because my heart and soul, I've been through this journey and I stand for this. So my heart is so on fire for people who are sincerely, genuinely desiring a map for that journey, the how to of getting from that place of like feeling like they're not on the right path, they're not soul aligned, who sincerely want to navigate that voyage. And so the evolutionary professional is the program that I absolutely adore and have put many years into developing, many years of testing and testing. This is a long tested process. So it's all well established in this world. This is not something that popped out last weekend. Right? This is the evolutionary professional is a very clear, clean map, which mirrors those 5 steps that I was just speaking about. However, it goes much more deeply into it, right? Helping people to understand where they are, why they are feeling restricted, the truth of who they are, how to navigate that journey in between where they are now and how they want to get to who they really are, navigating the complexity of that intangibility. And there are so many dimensions to this. For example, we didn't touch on relationships. Like, how do you navigate relationships? And people who are used to you being back where you were, and then suddenly you're in this woo-woo place. Like, what? How do you even navigate that, right? And that's just one example, right? How do you then, for example, bring in the deeper dimensions of calling in your evolutionary guides, because you have non-physical evolutionary guides waiting to come through for you? This is not just, Emily Lane and her personality showing up. This is Emily Lane, the being, which is connected, is a being, literally a being, like you are a being, and you, the listener, are a being. And we are all connected to streams of consciousness, streams of evolutionary intelligence. So it's like, how do you plug into your own stream of evolutionary intelligence? There's much deeper work to be done there, which is delicious, by the way. It's not even work, it's more like play. And then how do you work with an evolutionary toolkit to allow you to move from the ethers of who you are as a being in through the lens of the practicality of professionalism into then living from that place, right? So there are many, many dimensions to this. In a nutshell, this initial experience, this evolutionary professional experience, is a 6-week quest. We begin on the 31st of January, 2024 for our next one, which I'm super excited about. I'm super excited you're going to be on it.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. It's also multidimensional, but it's practical. Like I mentioned, we balance levity, which is about beingness, with gravity, which is about doingness. So it's the balance and the integration of all things in the same way as it is the balance and integration of both shadow and light. But it's understanding that you are not your shadow. Your shadow is that which wants to be transmuted, as we spoke about earlier on in our conversation. That contrasting shadow piece is where the gold is in many ways. And as we work to transmute that, we then elevate and expand the light capacity that we can hold. And so the light piece is your North Star. That's who you are. That's your home star. So this is really the essence of the journey. 6-week quest. It's going to be a beautiful cohort of amazing pioneers, evolutionary beings ready to have a deeper conversation. And it's magical. So I invite anyone who feels resonance, and I'll give you a tip on making decisions. It needs to do two things. Anytime somebody is speaking to you in this way, it needs to do two things. Number one, it needs to make sense relative to where you are. Number two, you need to feel resonance. And that is those goosebumps. It is that linear running vertically down through your nervous system, that central channel of, yeah, I feel it, I sense it. If it both makes sense and resonates, then it's right for you. So I'm so excited to I'll share a link with you, Brooke. That's the easiest way to do. I'll just share the link and then people can click and come join us for January 31st. And I look forward to seeing everyone there. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, such a pleasure. So for everyone who's listening to this, who's interested, the link is going to be in the show notes. So just head over there and it'll be one click away to step into this journey.
And you can also just go to Evolutionary Intelligence Academy and you'll see it there, the evolutionary professional, right? So evolutionaryintelligenceacademy.com. Thanks,
Beautiful.
Brooke.
Yeah. And for just one last question here to sort of bring it back to where we started around that younger version of you and the younger woman who you shared that you have so much love for, seeing yourself from that perspective. The last question I have for you is, do you have any words of wisdom that you wish that you could communicate to that younger version of yourself, or perhaps somebody in a similar place to where that younger version of yourself was?
The one that comes to heart right now is trust your adventurous spirit. Just trust it. Trust the resonance of it. It will not lead you astray. That which calls you is for you. Trust your heart. That's what I would say for sure. With a lot of love. A lot of love. It took a lot of courage to like you, Brooke, like all of us on this journey, it takes a lot of courage. And I will say for myself in my own heart, it took a lot of courage to go on this like epic quest. It's so worth it. So worth it. Yeah, so it's beautiful to be able to share that now in these moments with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And for those of us who want to follow along with your journey, where's the best place that we can interact with you?
Well, you're welcome to jump on the newsletter at evolutionaryintelligenceacademy.com. You'll find me on Instagram under evolutionary_intelligence, or you can find me on LinkedIn. So I'm in all those places. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for your time and
thank
your
you.
energy and your presence and commitment to doing this really important paradigm shifting work that is so needed in the world today. So
Oh,
thank you
thank you so
for
much, Brooke.
heeding the call and for saying yes to this voyage.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you for your work and your amazing presence and for creating a container where conversations of this nature can take place, right? And I also want to say thank you to the listener. Thank you for still being here, for still listening in these moments, right? Because that means then you're on your evolutionary journey, and I really want to honor you. And I want to wish you immense success and tremendous joy on your journey, because we souls who are in this kind of conversation, we're really all in this together. So thank you so much for the part that you are playing.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Art of Lost and Found podcast. I hope that you are feeling inspired and empowered to go forth and explore your curiosity and creativity. As always, if you want any more information about any of our guests or the show notes or anything we discussed on today's episode, you can head over to www.brookeeston.com/podcast. Thank you so much, and looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.